Hey, good afternoon. Thank you all for making time to be here today. I know it's a busy week. This is the third time since October of 2018 that we learned of a large data breach from DHS. I commend their transparency. This is a new practice under this administration. However, there's a pattern here that needs to be addressed. In June and July of 2018, 2,100 individuals had sensitive data exposed by hackers due to phishing emails via a DHS employee. It wasn't until October of 2018 that the legislature was notified. At that time, the department said that it takes very seriously our responsibility to protect the private information and data of Minnesotans, and will continue our vigilant efforts to uphold the highest standards of IT security and data privacy. No clear steps were outlined at that time. Another 3,000 people were affected by a data breach through another phishing email in September of 2018. Again, several months later in January, the legislature and the public was informed about the sensitive data available to hackers. Commissioner Lourey said about the data breach, we respect and value the privacy of Minnesotans that we serve, and we sincerely regret any concern or other negative impact this incident may cause. A private contractor was hired to investigate the breach. And here again today, another 11,000 people, another data breach, another security failure, another phishing email to an employee, and again, a delay in notifying people. This time, according to DHS, Minute is unable to identify what, if any, information was viewed or obtained by the hacker. They don't know what the hacker might have taken or have not taken. This begs a larger question. How serious is DHS about data security? 3 breaches in a year affecting 35,000 people. This is unacceptable. It was in February of this year that DHS purchased software to prevent phishing emails going through our system. So we have some questions that need to be answered to restore trust. They have a lot of work to do, and let's begin. What steps were taken when they discovered the breach? Why did outside contractors have to come in to investigate the breach? Why did they wait so long for software to prevent phishing emails after 3 major attacks came from phishing emails? What trainings have been implemented to prevent basic phishing email hacks? How many workers have gone through data security training? Are there ongoing expenses needed that we need to consider to prevent data security failures by DHS? And how will ongoing security investments affect services available to Minnesotans? Furthermore, DHS hired an outside contractor because the scope of the problem was too large for their IT department and too large for Minute. Where'd they get the funds for the outside contractor? Will this affect their budget request? And will this expense affect the services they provide? DHS IT is separate from Minute. They have 700 IT staff. I want you to think about that. On their own, 700 IT staff to make the system work and keep data secure. In addition to the security failures, they have computer systems that simply don't do what Minnesotans expect them to do. Starting in October 2013, you're all very familiar with the MNsure failure to launch. January 2016, eligibility problems reported in Medicaid and Minnesota Care, $271 million in losses. In April of 2018, they had to write off $30 million in Minnesota Care premiums because they had the wrong people enrolled in Minnesota Care and they couldn't collect funds that had been sent out. In May of 2018, we saw a lack of oversight on the Child Care Assistance Program. July of 2018, a breach exposing 21,000 Minnesotans to risk of personal identity loss. September 2018, another breach. April 2019, a breach exposes another 11,000 Minnesotans. Nearly $200 million spent to create MNsure software, and it never worked for eligibility. Minute and DHS IT are unable to protect Minnesotans and process their most basic information. Finally, what about the integrity of these state government agencies? A new report today highlights the basic failure of systems at DHS. Are they taking the allegations the CCAP internal controls memo released today and the CCAP fraud released earlier, are they taking them seriously? Carolyn Ham didn't know the name of her own investigators, and they haven't let her go. We don't see the legislative auditor's suggestions to improve investigators' oversight in child care providers. Commissioner Lourey is going to need to provide a full accounting, financial security screening, software, affected programs to show the public what he's doing to mitigate these problems going forward. Data breaches through phishing emails, some of the most basic hacking attempts, need to be corrected if we're going to trust the department. We understand that security failure didn't happen on purpose. An employee wasn't committing malfeasance. They just weren't being careful. We cannot allow more programs to be piled on top of this unstable platform. More importantly, we're not going to give the Department of Human Services more access to personal health data and sensitive personal information by giving them more healthcare programs until they have their house in order. I'm happy to take questions.
So what will the legislature, what should the legislature do?
We should ask DHS to pause. Right now, they are accelerating the responsibilities that the Department of Human Services would take on. First of all, we know MNsure isn't doing up to industry standards, and they're part of the enrollment problem. We know that METS isn't functioning well. They're just getting to the point where they're interacting with counties well. Our eligibility systems need to be brought up to a reasonable error standard. Are you familiar with the Person Master Index? Probably not. Duplicate Person Master Index numbers. So if you apply for medical assistance, you can end up with a new number. So if you log on to a website and you put your email in, it'll say, we think you're already here. Would you like to verify your password? But right now, our PMAP providers estimate a 10% error rate, duplicates, people in the system who have more than one number. And there might be a lot of reasons for it, but the department's known about it since 2015. And they didn't start working on it till they got caught.
So do you need bills to do this? Or are you just going to ask?
Senator Draheim has the Person Master Index bill. We heard it and had a meeting with the department today. They'll start taking it seriously. We're looking forward to that. But it always waits until the legislature calls them out or the legislative auditor. Look at CCAP. They knew the fraud was going on. They didn't improve their systems, and now we see they didn't even have basic internal controls in place to do the audits they were supposed to do at CCAP. So let's just take a breath. Let the department do what it's doing now. Let's help them do it well, and I am willing to be a partner in helping them do it well, but we're not adding anything else until they get this house in order.
Does the department?
Madam Chair, you have the ability to pressure the department into doing something. Will you withhold funds? Will you say you can't have this until you fix the problem?
They'll get new IT funds when I see a path that has the Department of Human Services and Minute working hand in glove to serve Minnesotans. That will mean program integrity. That will mean responsiveness. That will mean our programs work as they're designed.
Do you support the idea of, for CCAP, of just not funding it until the fraud has been eliminated or to your satisfaction?
Senator Abler is carrying a proposal. He's actually going to move it to a freeze and reform because we don't see a high level of seriousness with the governor and with the House fundamentally changing. Look at the report that came out today. Culturally, they weren't doing basic investigations. They didn't have basic internal controls in place. It's time for a wake-up call.
Does the department have the?
Sorry, just a follow-up. When you say freeze, that means $0.
Senator Abler has a transition program, and he will be able to address that this afternoon.
And do you support that?
He has a plan that he's rolling out this afternoon. I'm not going to get ahead of a colleague, but thank you.
Do you support the plan that he's going to roll out this afternoon? I mean,
Yes, the plan he's going to roll out this afternoon, yes.
How about OneCare? Does this take it off the table for you?
I think it's reasonable for us to say you need to have your house in order before you ask to take on something this big. Let's be clear. How many of you, I have a little PTSD about MNsure. Do you remember 2013? They want to, with funds that would be available July 1st, at a completely new program that has to be functional October 1st, and they want 51 FTEs. I mean, just thinking about it makes me break out into a cold sweat. Anyone who was here in 2013 knows what that will feel like.
And what about a new commissioner? We're expecting a new commissioner, and I know right now IT is separate, but how will that impact all of this for you?
I hope that they have someone who has significant private sector experience in managing complex projects, someone who can stand up to commissioners and say, we are going to work as partners, you're not going to dictate outcomes. IT has to work in concert with good business operations, and that means we need somebody who's going to help those commissioners, but be able to also hold the line and say, if you want good IT outcomes, this is what they look like. And I haven't seen a name floated, and so I'm a little uncomfortable commenting.
Madam Chair, it seems like DHS has a long track record of running Minnesota Care and Minnesota Medical Assistance, Medicare. So what makes you think adding more people to the roles of Minnesota Care will be the same kind of fiasco we had with MNsure?
They're not adding more people to the roles of Minnesota Care. And let me just go back to the list to help you with their Minnesota Care eligibility. Did you know the feds took $150 million from our basic health plan allotment because we didn't do eligibility for Minnesota Care right? Yeah. $150 million because we didn't do Minnesota Care eligibility right. And they wouldn't be enrolling people in Minnesota Care. It would be a new program.
Does the department have the resources that it needs? I mean, some of this could be sloppiness, and sloppiness could be because they don't have the funds that they need to do the job that they're mandated to do?
When I see a significant focus on these changes, I'll have a better idea of if they have the resources they need.
What did you learn from today's OLA that you didn't know before? You started to talk about that.
A lot of it wasn't a surprise to me, but the legislative auditor was very clear they didn't do good follow-up on basic bookkeeping. When people reported fraud, they didn't have a tracking system and a follow-up system.
I don't know if this is in your bill or any of the bills yet, but what have you had to say so far about handing over the investigative role to the BCA instead of having it be part of DHS?
I actually have in my bill an Office of Inspector General that would be a standalone. I disagree with the legislative auditor, which is not a comfortable position for me, but I would like, this is not, please let me be clear. I thought about independent OIG long before we got into session, had the bill drafted. It was one of the earliest bills I dropped. The key criteria would be to empower the governor to appoint an independent Office of Inspector General, a 6-year term confirmed by the Senate, and an exempt, an unclassified employee that could only be fired for cause. There will be a lot of responsibilities that need to be moved if we do create this independent office, and I am happy to work with the commissioners at MDH, at DHS, of course with the governor's office. I want this done right. This isn't, we're getting an OIG and we're moving it. That's a recipe for disaster. But we do need to get there so that there's independent oversight for the benefit of Minnesota program integrity.
Madam Chair, the governor's indicated he's pretty close to making an announcement on a new Minute commissioner. What do you want to see in that person?
I partially addressed this earlier, but I'm happy to do it again. No, that's okay. I want somebody with significant private sector experience, somebody who's strong enough to stand up for IT and push back on the commissioner on business operations so that we make sure that the IT systems that have to deliver to Minnesotans work for the agencies but are effective for the benefit of Minnesotans.
Is that possible with a gubernatorial appointee to get enough independence so that these problems that are acknowledged with MNsure and with MNLARS, that those can get fixed and we don't get future problems?
I think it is possible. I think this governor has significant experience with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I look at what he did on MNLARS, where he said, let's bring in an independent outside person so that everybody is on the same page. This person is a competent professional. But then, and I don't know how much he conveyed about this, but before they launched the next piece of MNLARS, he said to the software engineers, is this ready to go? And I spoke with former Minute Commissioner Clybourne, and before she would launch, she would say to the software engineers, is this ready to go? Because if it's not, I'll say no, and they were willing to be the bad guy. And so I think there are people who have the right mettle to do this very tough job, and they have to understand it's political, but I think you can find the right person.
What about the DHS Commissioner? How is he handling this? I believe you kind of praised his openness thus far in comparison to the previous administration. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I am pleased that there is a more proactive approach to reaching out to the legislature on mistakes, fumbles. It makes it easier to work collaboratively going forward.
So you've been pleased with Commissioner Lourey?
Yes.
Okay.
Senator, clear up for me. Do I understand right that you're willing to raise funding for IT-related issues if you're satisfied it'll be spent right, that they'll handle things right?
I would say reallocate funding might be a better description of it. If it's part of the governor's priorities, then we'll have to see what else we give up.
When I talked to Senator Marty about this, he said you have to spend more money to get this to work. The computers are out of date, big turnover, and employees, that type of thing. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, let me be clear. Starting in 2011, I knew our IT systems needed to be upgraded. They went for an internal build model, which is not working well and hasn't worked well historically. And when we see that culture change, let's look at the resources that are currently allocated and see if doing something differently can be done within those resources. And after we prove that out, then we'll see if we need more. But I am not going to commit to any level of spending beyond where we're at until I see a clear path forward.
Do you support the use of electronic sign-in, sign-out at providers, at daycare providers?
There are some that already do it, so my concern would be interoperability with the department. If the department says this is the only option you can use, that might be expensive for providers. And so I think there's some details we can work out there, but there are many providers that do have electronic sign-in, sign-out, or electronic attendance records.
Right, but it's not mandated currently, and so you're not sure about mandating it, it sounds like.
For smaller providers, if we look at the magnitude of CCAP, I want to be protective of those family child care centers that have 1 or 2 CCAP families. Requiring them to have electronic sign-in, sign-out seems burdensome. So let's find the right place. If you're an institutional center and you're already doing it, then it's probably not difficult for you to implement something that complements what DHS wants. We just need to be cautious. DHS has put a lot of pressure on home-based family child care providers. I don't want this to be a cudgel.
You mentioned you had some concern about DHS maybe not being able to be trusted with medical records of Minnesotans. Is that in reference to the OneCare, that they'd be taking on more medical
They would
records?
get more and more personal information. The more programs we put under the purview of this department, the more personal information they will have on Minnesotans.
But isn't that some of what you're asking for? A lot of the accountability measures to eliminate fraud will require more documentation, social security numbers, tax records to verify some of the things that right now are just, they take a provider's word for it or a parent's word for it.
No, if you look at the forms, that's already required to be reported. It's just not being coordinated and verified. If you look at the person master index issue, we collect a lot of information. My concern is the programs we already have, they're not protecting. And so adding one more program just puts more Minnesotans in the same boat as the people who had their data breached.
How do you respond to the kind of don't throw the baby out with the bathwater type argument, which is these programs are serving a lot of families?
1 million Minnesotans. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I've been very clear. Let's pause where we're at. Let's get this house in order. Let's make sure they're doing the essential blocking and tackling that Minnesotans expect before we add one more thing to their already full plate.
Anything else, guys?
And are you confident that the new commissioner will be able to do that?
Absolutely. I look forward to it. I'll work with him and we'll make it happen. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.